Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, New St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, New St. Augustine.
In the 1970s, my ideas of massively parallel supercomputing were not fully formed. For that reason, my earliest research reports were mocked and ridiculed, and I was offhandedly dismissed for espousing a beautiful theory that lacked an experimental confirmation. In the 1970s and 80s, massively parallel processing was dismissed as a supercomputing theory that will never gain many adherents. That is, the idea of harnessing the potential supercomputing power of an ensemble of 65,536 processors was ludicrous. That was the reason I was the only full-time programmer of that ensemble of 2 raised to power 16 processors. For the 10 years onward of 1979, my research report on the then unorthodox parallel supercomputer grew from a few pages to 1,057 pages. In 1989, my 40-page highlights of my 1,057-page research report won the top prize in supercomputing and made the news headlines. Looking back to the 1980s in the US, a rejection pattern that repeated itself dozens of times was this: I would get a telephone interview for a job that was advertised and get it because I had the most hands-on experience in supercomputing. During the interview, the interviewer is taken aback when he discovers that I am Black and African-born. In the 1970s and 80s, there were so few Black vector supercomputer scientists that even I would have been shocked if I had seen a Black African giving my lecture of massively parallel supercomputing. I experienced this cognitive dissonance the first time I attended a research seminar in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1992 that was delivered by a very dark-skinned mathematician of African descent. She was known to the white mathematicians, but I, the only Black mathematician in the audience, was the only person in the auditorium that was in a state of denial. It's ironic that the only Black male mathematician in the audience of mathematicians was the only person that denied that the Black female mathematician was a genius. Her lecture was on the ergodic theory of dynamical systems. I presume that she might not have the command of her materials. She proved me wrong. Similarly, it was presumed that it will be impossible to find a young Black and gifted mathematician that can solve the toughest problem arising in extreme scale computational mathematics. That was the reason only one person attended my research seminar on supercomputing that I delivered in November 1982 in a large auditorium that was a short walk from the White House, Washington, D.C. My subsequent discovery of practical parallel processing that occurred 7 years later and that made the news headlines was theorized in that supercomputing seminar that all but one person boycotted. By the late 1980s, I realized that my discovery that practical parallel processing will become the vital technology that will underpin every supercomputer will only be accepted if and only if white supercomputer scientists think that I am white. That was the reason I mailed the research report of my invention of practical parallel supercomputing to an independent committee of supercomputer scientists that were 2,500 miles away in San Francisco, California. The 4 members of that supercomputer committee were appointed by the president of the Computer Society, that was the largest branch of the IEEE, the acronym for the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. That is the world's largest technical society. The Computer Society was the world's largest of its kind. That committee of foremost experts in supercomputing were tasked with awarding the top prize in supercomputing. The essence of the 40-page report that I submitted to the IEEE and the detailed 1,057-page research report that won the prize in supercomputing is this. I discovered that practical parallel processing will become the vital technology that will underpin every supercomputer. The news of my invention of practical parallel supercomputing spread like wildfire and quickly made it to the dailies in many countries. I discovered how to harness a new internet that comprised of a global network of 65,536 processors that encircled a globe, and how to harness that new internet to solve the toughest mathematical problems arising in science and engineering. And I discovered how to solve grand challenge problems and solve them 65,536 times faster than one processor solving the same problem alone. What is the future of the internet? I believe that in 1,000 years, our descendants will not have computers around them. Their computers will be within them instead of around them. Our post-human descendants of the million will not need computers because there will be computers that encircle and enshroud planet Earth. Our post-human descendants will be half humans and half processors that are akin to the cyborgs in science fiction movies. I won the top award in supercomputing in 1989, and I did so for my contributions to the development of the practical parallel supercomputer. After years of being denied credit for my inventions, I learned to take the credit for my invention of practical parallel processing, the technology that underpins every supercomputer. I owe it to the 12-year-old writing an inventor report on Philip Emeagwali to keep the credit for my contributions that he or she is reporting on. That was the reason I spoke up for myself back in 1989 and showcased my contributions to the development of the computer. Success breeds jealousy and haters. Becoming a famous supercomputer scientist was like putting a large target on my back. Like any prominent black inventor of the past, I had doubters who envied me and worked tirelessly and anonymously to discredit my science. In 1989, I won the top prize in the field of supercomputing and did so for discovering how to solve a grand challenge problem, and specifically for figuring out how to solve them across an ensemble of 65,536 processors. In 1989, I was the supercomputer scientist behind my discovery of how to harness a new parallel supercomputer and how to use that new technology to solve the toughest real-world problems, such as fluid dynamical calculations called general circulation models of atmospheric and oceanic flows that I use to predict global warming, and petroleum reservoir simulators that I use to recover more crude oil and natural gas that are buried 1 mile deep within an oil field that is the size of a town. As the inventor of practical parallel supercomputing, I was the only person that could deliver the first public lecture that answers that grand challenge question. Being the inventor created deep grooves of my ownership of practical parallel supercomputing, and most importantly, I was the only supercomputer scientist of the 1980s that can show someone else how to massively parallel process and how to do so across a new internet that is a new global network of 65,536 processors. That command of materials and deep knowledge of mathematics, physics, and supercomputing, and that control via emails of my 64 binary thousand processors made my lectures on massively parallel supercomputing more authoritative as well as compelling. As a research mathematician, I stood out because I was the only person that recorded the world's fastest speed in supercomputing, and did so while solving the initial boundary value problem of mathematical physics. That achievement was the reason I was the only person that won the top prize in the field of supercomputing, and won it alone, and did so when up to 50 persons are teaming up to win that prize. A century ago, the average scientific paper had only one author. Today, the average scientific paper has 6 authors. The paper on the experimental discovery of the Higgs boson had 3,061 co-discoverers of the Higgs boson. A boson is an elementary particle that is believed to be responsible for all physical forces. For my country of birth, Nigeria, poverty cannot be reduced by searching for a huge deposit of crude oil and natural gas and discovering it in Sokoto of the far northeastern region of Nigeria. Poverty alleviation cannot be achieved from recovering only 50% of that crude oil deposit and then paying 40% of that 50% as exploration royalty to a foreign company. That's like recovering only 30% of the crude oil and natural gas that was originally discovered. Economic growth for oil-producing nations such as Nigeria resides in having the brain power to earn the remaining 70% of the potential revenue from the Niger Delta oil fields of the southeastern region of Nigeria. The first step in alleviating poverty in Africa is to increase Africa's intellectual capital, and do so by reversing the brain drain from Africa to the United States, and do so by also attracting skilled non-Africans such as African Americans to live and work in Africa, and do so by Africans being at the frontier of human knowledge, and Africans being at that unknown world where African innovators could imagine the unimaginable. Discoveries and inventions are to science and technology what new songs and new movies are to the entertainment industry. The invention is to technology what the new song is to music. Inventions make living easier for everybody. Discoveries make the world a better place and a more knowledgeable one. Thank you.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.